Welcome back to Sailing Corribby Mwera. This is the third video in a series on all the modifications that I've done to Mwera in the first half of this year, prior to taking part in the Baltimore Jester Challenge. In this episode I'm going to be looking at how I designed and constructed the mast foot, the mast partners, and how I modified the companionway and one or two other modifications that I've made. At this point I realise I need to describe how I'm going to install the mast in the boat a bit more clearly, and this is unfortunately the best photograph I've got to demonstrate that. So here we're looking through the companionway and we can see a 5-inch aluminium tube that's sticking about 60 centimetres above the deck and the top of the picture, coming down through the cabin roof and going into that square potty locker, which I will talk about shortly. So that tube really is my mast mounting mast. I'm calling it a mast tube, and where it sits on the keel, if you like, in the bottom of the locker, I'm calling that the mast foot, and where it comes through what was the fore hatch through the deck to the outside world, I'm calling that the mast partners. And that will, if I define those terms now, I think that will help in the rest of my explanations. The mast itself, which we know is a tapered aluminium street pole, is a snug fit inside the mast tube, and when it's raised it will drop inside this tube and rest on a bolt going through the tube, but I'll come back to that later. I'm going to start by describing one modification that I did back in 2023, the idea of which I got from the Facebook group, and for want of a better name I'm going to call this the potty locker, which is the locker, square locker for the portable chemical toilet on a Corribby, which sticks up into the cushions of the V-berth, and it's quite uncomfortable to sleep there, especially that I nowadays tend to sleep with my head in the bow and my feet towards the stern, which I just somehow find more comfortable. And the idea is to shave off this raised edge flush with the rest of the top of the lockers, and then make a new supports around the edge of the locker, and put a larger plywood cover on the locker. And I carried out this modification before I went on my round Britain trip and was really pleased that I had done. I did it all very much at the last minute. You can see in this locker, at the front of it, there is a bulkhead. And on my boat, a lot of the bulkheads, which are only 6mm thick, and they've almost just been tabbed into the hull, they're not really properly fiberglassed in. And in fact, this one was really quite loose and not doing anything. So I removed it and spent some time grinding down the resin to get back to the fiberglass fibres, if you like, in the area, to get a good bond of the epoxy and fiberglass bonding into the hull nicely. I got myself a high quality dust mask for this job and some white PPE suits, and it's really the most terrible part of all this work inside the boat is grinding fiberglass. It's worth getting the good equipment. So with that new bulkhead installed, I now had this plan for the mast foot. The first layer of plywood is the one with the red arrow there, and that red arrow points towards a small hole drilled that will be at the bottom of the mast tube and allow any moisture that comes down the mast tube to drain through into the bilges. The next layer has a 5-inch hole cut in it where the mast tube will drop into, and then the third layer is another ring to give a bit of a deeper insertion of the mast tube into the foot here. So all these different layers were glued with epoxy into the hull and in the layers between the two layers of plywood, and glassed in with multiple layers of biaxial cloth in ever enlarging sizes, so that the edge of the fiberglass is tapered into the hull. And and then peel ply used on the final layer to give a nice finish. The final picture is a bit further ahead where the mast tube has been installed, and you can see the ring, which is the third layer of the foot, which has also been glassed in, that whole area where the tube meets the foot, and then there's a ring which is level with the top of the locker to support the locker lid. That round hole just under that ring is where the electrics will come out that have come down the mast from the anchor light and the VHF antenna. They come out through that hole and get plugged into the boat electrics. So now we move on to the construction of the mast partners, which will be positioned where this forehatch is. That came out and was moved more to the aft in the main cabin roof, and the mast tube is going to be positioned in the front half of this square hole where the hatch was. At this point I did also mark a midline all the way down the deck of the boat using a chalk line, and discovered that this deck hatch is far from being centred on the midline of the boat, which is just as well, otherwise my mast would have ended up to one side as well. But I worked out the midline of the boat and then marked that at several points with a marker. So once the hatch was out, I ground this whole surround, this sort of raised plinth, back to the fiberglass again as before. Then started cutting out plywood for the mast partners. So my plan here was to make a plug which would fill the orifice where the hatch had been, with one layer resting on top and then three layers filling the space, and then glass this thick plug onto the hull on the outside and on the inside, again with multiple layers of biaxial cloth, each one larger, bigger than the one before, so they were nicely tapered into the hull. Once I'd done that, I still felt that the cabin roof wasn't quite strong enough, particularly as lateral forces of the mast might sort of buckle the cabin structure. So I decided to stiffen up the roof with some laminated beams on the inside, and then brace these onto the sides of the cabin roof, really to give a much more stiffer, more robust structure. And I had 3 layers of softwood which I epoxied together and then epoxied into the roof, put the knees in, and then glassed the whole structure again with several layers more of biaxial cloth. And basically what I was looking for was peace of mind on a windy night when I was in the middle of the ocean somewhere, and I think I achieved that by the end. Right, so on this composite picture on the left side you can see the mast tube already epoxied and fiberglassed into the partners. But before I could do that, I had to be sure that the tube was correctly mounted in the boat, both fore and aft and from side to side. And I started by trying to get the boat level in both planes. I had to jack up the trailer on one side and put some shims under the tyres to try and get it level side to side, and then adjusted the dolly wheel on the trailer to get it level fore and aft. And there really aren't many flat surfaces on the boat that you know are meant to be flat and level, but in the end I convinced myself I had got it level and decided to commit to it. So once I got the boat level, then I had to get the tube perpendicular in the boat, and for this I got one of those laser levels you can use for tiling, and I directed a vertical laser light through the companionway, which would then pick up the mast tube inside the cabin, but also the mast tube outside the cabin, and you can just about make that out in the right hand image. The red lines don't all line up because if I was in line with the laser properly I would block its light shining onto the mast. But anyway, I went through this several times until I was happy that all was good, and then I bonded in the mast tube at the foot and fiberglassed around that, and also at the partners and fiberglassed around that, and at long last the mast tube was installed. Just as a little aside, I also had to re-bond in my depth transducer, which is not a through hull, it just rests on the inside of the hull in front of that new bulkhead. So I made this little plywood block and epoxied the tube in place, and then around the bottom where you can see a gap, I filled all that in with some boat filler, some marine filler, to make it oil proof, and then filled it with oil. It was a much more secure mounting than it had been previously. The third stage of all these modifications was to redesign and construct a new companionway area, which basically meant boxing in where the sliding hatch and the washboards had been, and then fitting a large waterproof deck hatch, which I hoped would keep the spray and the waves out of the cabin. So I came up with this construction made out of more of the 18mm ply, including a new plinth for what had been the forehatch, which I now moved to the top of the main cabin area. Lots more grinding and epoxying and fiberglassing, but it all came together quite nicely. I also had to move the clipper duet instrument and where the old log used to be from the port side of the companionway and move it to the top of this new construction, because when the hatch was open it would obscure the instruments. Of course, once all the construction is done, there's still lots of sanding and filling and fairing and resanding that has to be done before you get onto the painting and the final top coat stage. But it all came together quite nicely, and I constructed a little box to house the clipper duet on the top of this construction, which you can see there, and next to it there's a little mounting I made for my navigation tablet in a little plastic holder. So that was all the modifications done, and the final stage of all this was to do a trial raising of the mast and then to practice rigging the whole sail. And I did manage to capture the mast raising on video, and it was quite fun doing this with my friendly neighbours, who are always willing to help out and show lots of interest in my projects.
Down to Citra and Citra, so it's not the oil cool. Cylinder head, all the engines been apart. Last night we found a drop of water in the oil cooler.
Right.
The oil cooler all along.
Am I the boss?
Yes.
Okay, so what happens here is that the mast, we want to get it vertical, and it's in that sort of hinged sleeve attached to the mast tube, which is the mounting. But that hinge, you can see, is you see what I mean, the hinge, it's very flimsy, so if it fell to the side it would just snap it, and that would be a shame, and the mast would probably get bent. Once we've got it vertical, this pin, it will be resting on this pin which is going through here, the bottom of the mast. So we take that out, and then it drops down into this hole, about not quite a metre. Okay? So I think if you lift maybe as high as you can, and I'll do a bit here, and then I'll sort of take over, and perhaps you'll come up on the cabin. You can stand anyway, you can stand on here, stand on here, any way you want.
So I'd enlisted the help of my neighbours to assist with getting the mast up for the first time. Peter's down the drive pulling on a rope attached to the top of the mast, and Joe, nearest the camera, is slowly letting out what is the main halyard, which I'd rigged as a pair of aft stays, as it were, to give some side-to-side stability. Since then I've managed to do it a couple of times with two other helpers, but no extra ropes, and it's gone pretty smoothly.
Pin coming out, mast going in. Is it the correct rotation? Wait, where's the rotation, where's the back? Peter, you can let go slightly.
So here.
Not quite. this bit of fiberglass here, no, oh maybe it is actually. Can you get that bolt out? Okay, that should hinge open. So I think we're in. Huh? It doesn't take long, but it will go wrong even more quickly.
It's starting to lean.
Look at that, man.
Went that way. I think you actually.
Doesn't that look good?
This way 'cause it was heading quite a lot.
Doesn't that look good, eh?
So with the mast successfully stepped, all that was left to do now was to rig the sail, and I spent a couple of days getting the sail and the battens fitted and lazy jacks and sheetlets and sheets and different parrels and so on, getting the whole sail rigged. It's quite a palaver, quite a lot of new lines to learn, but it all came together nicely and I was really chuffed with the way it looked. The only thing left now was to get it all rigged up on the water itself. There we go, finally. Mwera's all rigged. Sails up. Enjoying feeling a bit of wind through the sails. And hoping to sleep here again tonight, Parkstone, and then head out tomorrow, probably just to anchor behind somewhere behind Brown Seal, around the island in Poole Harbour. It's pretty strong winds on Saturday, but I'll do a bit of sailing around in the harbour tomorrow. Maybe even when it's windy, I'll do a bit of sailing in the harbour, just see how she behaves. You can see she's straining at the bit. Cut those mooring lines and she'll be away. Great, so that brings me to the end of this third video, and all the modifications, junk rig conversion has been completed. In the next episode I will start talking about launch and making my way to the start of the Jester Baltimore Challenge 2025. See you there.